Hey everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar. We're gonna start in a couple of minutes. If you all log on, please put your stuff on mute and we'll let you know once we begin. Thank you. Okay, great. I guess we can get started. We have a few people on already. People would start joining. This webinar is recorded, so if you miss anything, we will be sending this out to everyone. But good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the National Center for Victims of Crimes, a webinar under the Multidisciplinary Responses to Families and Communities in Complex Homicide Cases grant. Today's webinar will be on trauma-informed victim and witness interviewing for the justice system by Justin Boardman. Before we begin, we will have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A section. I believe Justin will be able to view them, or I will read them to him, and we will go from there. So a little bit about Justin Boardman. Justin Boardman served 15 years with the West Valley City Police Department in Utah. Justin spent 8 years as a patrol officer before being assigned to the Special Victims Unit. During his first year as an investigator for the Special Victims Unit, Justin was named Investigator of the Year by the department. Throughout his assignment, Justin conducted nearly 300 forensic child victim interviews and 140 adult victim interviews. Justin co-authored a trauma-informed victim interview protocol for adult victims of sexual assault. This new program uses the neurobiology of trauma to gain additional information to be used in investigation. The strategy has been studied and shown to increases in prosecutorial success along with procedural changes, Justin presents and consults nationally and abroad to strengthen investigations in a way that is victim-centered and trauma-informed. Justin recently left active police work to focus on changing the culture of the justice system. Without further ado, turn it over to Justin.
Hi, all. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for me to get out and spread some more of this knowledge out there. So this is really, webinars are weird already, right? Because it's hard to play off of people's facial cues and things like that. So I'll do the best that I can. And we'll get started. So some people have got some of the knowledge. Some people have heard trauma-informed sort of response sort of classes. Some people may have had some trauma-informed victim interview sort of training. We all have different levels, and especially where we're at in our careers. If, say in law enforcement, depending on where you are in law enforcement, you may have much more wisdom, if you will, depending on how long you've been on the job. This presentation is to help add to some of the wisdom that we all have through our lenses, and hopefully we can find a few points to drop in and try and start changing some of the system and the way that we interact with the public. But the cool thing about this is you can glean some more evidence from whoever you're talking to help with your investigation. So let's get going. You are here, right? The proverbial drinking from the fire hose. There is a lot of information coming at you, and it's going to be more surface related so that you can see that's a normal reaction. This is how I communicate with that reaction to get more information for your case. If some of this, why we have these sort of reactions, if you need more deeper understanding, there are more experts out there that can help you there. I am not a neurobiologist. I am a former detective, and I've applied this to my practice, this knowledge, and it was life-changing for me personally, but also for the survivors, victims, and the witnesses that I would interview, because it provides more procedural justice, if you will. We're going to talk about that a lot today too. So there's going to be a lot of information. As adult learners, we might pick a couple little things out of here. The more important stuff that I hope that you're able to keep, I'll be repeating it a lot. So some of it might be basic, but it's super important. It's great to hear from different people through their lenses some of the same material, because sometimes you might have a different aha moment or get something else out of it. So first off, what is trauma-informed? It's this buzzword, right? Trauma-informed this, trauma-informed that, trauma-informed care. Everybody needs to be trauma-informed. What is trauma-informed? So the definition of trauma-informed that I am using is that you know something about trauma. And this is for the justice system. This is to help build cases in a more victim-centric way and get better evidence. So the justice system can be more trauma-informed. There's a lot of places where it needs improvement, but it may not always be totally trauma-informed. We do put victims on the stand, and we have defense attorneys that will question our witnesses, question our victims, and twist things around. That's not trauma informed. So this is to build our cases, and it's for the justice system. And through my experience and some others, it's worked beautifully well. So it's not therapy, but sometimes it can act therapeutically. So our objectives, if you will, are to open our minds. Let's go ahead and relax, especially since you are at your office or wherever you're at. Relax. Let's get into our heads. Let's start thinking through some things. Let's challenge ourselves. So we want to question our biases and our thoughts. So biases, that's it's a hard word, especially when it comes to police work, because a lot of us in police work, and I was one of them, would hear this, "You're biased." I'm like, no, I'm not. Because bias went off as being prejudiced or racist or something like that. Biases are similar and can certainly tie in there. But if you don't like ice cream, you have a bias against ice cream. And these biases can be how we were brought up in life, through your lens. You know, certainly I was brought up, I'm Caucasian and I'm male. So I have some male privilege. I have some privileges as far as race is concerned, that I'm starting to recognize and see more now. It's just how we came to being, ourselves, our influences. So it's not a bad thing, but it's good to hear or see and understand your biases and where you can tweak things and make things better. And that can be uncomfortable. It certainly has been for me, over the last couple of years of questioning why I did this and why I did this wrong. Was it because I was biased? That sort of thing. It's uncomfortable, but that uncomfortableness is learning. So go for it. Question through your stuff, especially since you're by yourself more than likely right now and can think through things like that instead of having other coworkers at the table and stuff like that. So there's about this presentation that you're getting right now is getting crammed into about an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes. And it's actually 2 presentations. And sometimes I can take all day to do these 2 presentations. But this first one, we're going to keep going back to these 5 points. So guilt. Guilt for me was once I realized that I was talking to people incorrectly that were traumatized, I started realizing the harm that did. And there was a lot of guilt that came with it. So that would play back at maybe on a domestic violence call, or maybe it was, responding to a shooting and people are yelling and screaming at me because they were traumatized. I didn't recognize it as trauma. I recognized it as a threat. So a lot of those people, even though they're super upset, ended up in handcuffs and sitting on the curb. Or I know I've booked a victim of domestic violence in jail because I couldn't read the trauma and the emotions. So there is some guilt that comes with that, but we didn't know what we didn't know. So here was the problem, right? As you look around the pictures on the screen, victims have a wide range of behaviors, and some of them are certainly bizarre and not appropriate for the situation. So, I've been on situations where somebody should be traumatized and they're laughing. You're like, why are you laughing? This horrible thing just happened. But it's this response for this situation. So trauma is just that. It's a normal body and mind reaction. It's normal to abnormal situations. So it seems abnormal, but it's not. However, people respond. So a lot of times these behaviors and these statements were interpreted by police, by myself, or by somebody trying to get some more information as inconsistent. And there was gaps in memory, and there was all these emotions, and they were interpreted as lying. That now you're just making things up, you know, especially if somebody calls you back, a witness calls you back the next day and says, you know what, I saw this too. And you're thinking to yourself, with that shooting, that homicide, or what have you, well, that's a key element. How could you have left that out or not remembered that yesterday when it was fresh in your head and we were talking? So that could be part of the trauma that happened. So our police reactions. Dr. Campbell out of Michigan did a bunch of studies around this, and a lot around sexual assault. This information has come to the justice system through sexual assault investigations. And so a lot of the examples and researchers have that lens. So she went out to investigate why these cases were not, sexual assault cases were not being filed, and so on and so forth. And she had an opportunity to meet with some of the detectives and the officers that responded to this. The stuff they say, it makes no sense, is what they would tell her. One officer, they can't get their story straight. I see them hedge, making it up as they go. No way it's true. No one would act that way if it was true. They lie all the time, I can tell. Well, yeah, this is kind of what we're thinking in our heads. And some of us still do, because this information has not been out there. And even if you are a multidisciplinary team member and not a police officer, this stuff affects us in our own worlds as well. So maybe you're, let's assume for a moment you guys all have a teenager, and maybe that teenager is 13 and is pushing some boundaries, and maybe you have a last piece of cake in the kitchen and you're saving it for breakfast tomorrow morning, right? Everybody likes cake for breakfast, I hope. And the next morning you get up and you walk into the kitchen and it's gone. And you go into your 13-year-old's room and you go, what the heck? My cake's gone. And they turn around and say, I didn't eat it. Well, you know dang well it's just you and your teenager in the house. Who else would have come into the house and ate it? So you start questioning them. Well, what's that chocolate fork doing over there? And they start lying to you. And they have all these little gaps, and they start making things up. They can't get their story straight. The stuff that your teenager's saying makes no sense. You see them hedge every time you catch them in another little twist, like the chocolate that's on the fork on their nightstand. And then they confess, and you're like, ha ha, I gotcha. Liar, liar, pants on fire, right? Well, the thing is, when somebody is traumatized, they can present this same way. Whoa. This is the website, right? I don't know what's going on. Uh-oh.
What happened, Justin?
My website just crashed, I think. Are you guys still seeing the screen?
Yes, we could still see the presentation and we could still see you.
Oh, okay. Then something behind my stuff went bad. So I've lost my screen. So, okay, and let's see here. Oh, something's happening. Here we go. Here's the meeting controls. Nope. All right. Just about there, I hope. PowerPoint, boom. Okay, so you're on the police reaction, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now if I turn this, are we to the Walmart?
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but it totally logged me out of the internet. Okay, or at least, anyway, we're back. Well, that was fun. We were just traumatized. All right, clearing breath. And away we go. So we talked about the chocolate cake. And the chocolate cake, our teenager was fibbing to us, and we caught him because they didn't make much sense, and we cornered them and stuff. And our victims will present the same way during trauma. Our victims and witnesses, if they've witnessed this traumatic event, can also have that reaction. So let's go to the Walmart. So let's put this in police terms, if you will. When we were coming out of the police academy, we would get put with a field training officer. Most of the time it was graveyard shift or afternoon shift. And they would put us with a seasoned officer, or as seasoned as we had, and we would go out on patrol. It was usually somebody that was going to teach you some things on real life scenarios. So you're driving past the Walmart and you see Mel on a bike. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and he's going from one side of the parking lot to the other side of the parking lot. He's not going into the Walmart. He's not going back out to the main street. Well, that's kind of hinky. When you have an adult at 2 o'clock in the morning riding a bike across the parking lot like that. Now, in my city, if you did not have a flashlight or a headlight on your bike, it was a city code violation, and I could write a ticket for that. So he's like, that's a violation, stop him, and let's see what's going on. Because at 2 o'clock in the morning, most people would drive to the Walmart, and if he doesn't have a car, and he's, he looks like he's about 30 years old or older, then he probably doesn't have a job. Probably doesn't have a job because maybe he's lost his license from a DUI. Maybe he has warrants for his arrest. He could be doing burglaries or running drugs. Let's stop him and see what's up. And you get out of the car and you're nervous, certainly as we all were on our first pedestrian stops, if you will. And you start talking to him. Where are you coming from? Well, I came from Joe's house. Okay, well, where does Joe live? I don't know, over there about a block. I kind of crash on the sofa sometimes. Okay, where are you going? Oh, I don't know, some other person's house over here that I know of, and things like that. You go, this isn't making sense. So where were you coming from again? And in your head, he said Joe's house, but this time he says Mike's house. And you go, aha, there's an inconsistency there, so I'm going to pounce on it. I'm going to go over it and over it and over it again. And I'm going to write him a ticket anyway for the headlight violation. And then all of a sudden he comes up with some warrants, so on and so forth. And so you put him in handcuffs, search incident to arrest, maybe you get in his backpack, and there's some things from vehicle burgs, or maybe there's some dope in it, right? You caught the nervousness, you caught him in a lie, but our victims may, and a lot of times will present the same way as our suspects have been done. And so that's been where a big gap in the communication lies. So our story starts, right, eons ago. We can go all the way back into evolution on how our brains formed and so on and so forth. But let's just go halfway. Let's go to cavemen. We have some pretty solid evidence right? And we were hunters and gatherers. So, you know, maybe we're out hunting prey, maybe we're out gathering plants to eat, that sort of thing. And every once in a while, maybe a bear would come out at us, but maybe that saber-toothed tiger would jump out. Well, as our brains evolved from this time to this time now, our part of our brain's been going through this evolution and coming to where it is now. We're going to go through a couple of those steps and show you why. But back then, it was mostly brainstem and this area of the brain that would react automatically. So what that would look like, all it really wanted to do, our brain is magnificent. Our bodies are magnificent. And the way that they worked, so complex. Our brains have evolved to be quite spectacular when it comes to this trauma stuff, or when a saber-toothed tiger jumps out. It's very good at those reactions to keep us alive. To keep us healed afterwards, or to deal with these traumas, it's not so good at. But to keep us alive, it's pretty cool. So let's go back to Africa, if we will. Maybe this is the Serengeti, and we've got some impalas at the watering hole, right? So at this watering hole, they know that this is a dangerous place to be. If you look at the impalas in the right-hand area, they're looking out. They're looking out for other predators, threats, right? Because that's what they're used to, is lions will come down and pick them off. Then we have the other 4 that are drinking from the watering hole. And you can see their eyes, they're looking up, right? Because they're hyper vigilant that this is a dangerous place. And then all of a sudden, that happens, right? The alligator comes out from underneath the water. There's this moment in time. I'm going to go backwards, back here to here. So that reaction is something that is brainstem. If this impala here, if you can see my arrow, well, certainly, holy crap, right? If it would have thought 1 second while down here partaking from the watering hole and goes, huh, there's some big old teeth, he'd be dead, right? Because he didn't react fast enough. He'd be dead. So this reaction in their head was something they couldn't control or even think about or rationalize. It was just to save its life, if you will. So this moment in time. So this could also happen if we are interviewing at a gang shooting and members of the gang were present when their buddy was just murdered. They could also have this moment in time. So this, right? So this is kind of what happens in our brains, right? You have this prefrontal cortex area. So this area of the brain, front area, if you will, and right there. Then that bam moment hits. That area of the brain gets impaired. So it slows down. All these sorts of reactions happen that takes away access to that area of the brain, okay? For the most part, it gets impaired. That's where we rationalize things, where we think about things. And it's a switch. So that switch here, right there, that's something that we cannot control. We can't control that. So that happens like with the impala that just happened, but that also happens to us sometimes. and it gets impaired, and this area of the brain takes over. So we can call that, we'll call that here the defense circuitry. But that could be places like, if you've heard of the amygdala, the hippocampus, all that sort of fun stuff is in there. But for officers, it's easier to, well, hey, I'm a cop. I like 4-letter words and bright colors. So I want it simple. I want to know that there's a rational brain that's thinking like we are right now. And then the holy crap brain, if you will, when somebody jumps out of a car with a gun on a traffic stop and we go into what we've been trained to do, that takes over. So we want to know that there's those two parts of the brain. So this can happen, this takeover can happen during physical assault, sexual assault, threats, attacks, all sorts of different dangers that are out there, from shootings to witnessing shootings, car crashes. It's the whole gamut. So this little area of the brain, that defense circuitry, is always scanning the environment for dangers. It's always looking for that saber-toothed tiger. So it's always on the lookout. And when it detects this danger, it will take over our thinking area of the brain and react automatically. So we saw that in the alligator coming out, right? So it's kind of like a smoke detector. It's always on. It's always in our head. It's always going. And when it senses danger, it will go off. And that reaction and what it does after that is something that we can't control. So it might look like this. Maybe we are on a domestic. Maybe we're on a shooting. Maybe we're on something like that. And you have a perpetrator that you're talking to, or somebody who's not even on scene who wasn't traumatized. Then you have the victims and witnesses. So let's kind of take a look at both sort of situations. So our perpetrators, let's say for a shooting, they know what they want to get accomplished. If they're doing a drive-by, they're tunnel visioned at the target or the house or the group of people that are standing there. That's their target. That's what they're looking at. Well, at that moment in time, that group of people or people inside the house are terrified and overwhelmed. There's bullets flying. The suspect is focused. They're looking at where they are doing what they intended to do, to shoot, to what have you. Their defense circuitry is in control. That victim witness, that switch has gone off in their head. The perpetrators, for the most part, their thinking's planned, systematic. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that. I'm going to react in this sort of way. So they know what they're doing. Even whether it's recklessly or what have you, they are in control of that. The victim is involuntary focus on danger and threats for survival. This is important when we're talking to our witnesses and victims. And we're going to go over that a few times. They have a perceived control of behaviors and actions. Just like right now at your desk, you have this perception of control. You're in control right now. That is until an elephant comes crashing through the door. Then you're not in control anymore. It just happened. You're like, holy crap, there's an elephant in my office. What have you? You have perceived control. Our perpetrators have a perceived control until something else happens to them unexpected. So maybe if that's in a physical fight, all of a sudden our victim pulls out a knife and stabs them in the neck. They aren't in control at that point, right? So the victims and the witnesses' behavior is controlled by emotions and reflexes. So whether they're running from the crime scene, whether they are super emotional when you're talking to them, this is controlled at this point in time by the defense circuitry. So when we're talking to the perpetrator or somebody who's not traumatized, their memories are orderly. And the narrative is chronological. And that's what we go out and look when we're doing investigations. We want to know everything that happened from the beginning until the end. But the victims, their memories can be fragmented, illogical, and not chronological. They can be. So a flashbulb memory. We want to talk about this for a few different reasons. So it's a vivid memory of an emotionally arousing event. What does that look like for us? Well, for our victims, it might be that pop, 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 pop moment. Maybe for us, it's when somebody jumps out of the car on a traffic stop with a gun. For a domestic violence victim, maybe that's them being pinned up against the wall, being strangled. So that moment in time is going to be more like a Polaroid picture, a flashbulb memory. So it's going to be a picture of this event. So if we are all thinking about a traumatic time in our existence, and this could even be your kid jumping out of the closet and scaring you to death. Right now, that memory, more likely than not, is in a picture form, okay? So that picture is in your memory, and it's encoded with those emotions and those senses, all right? That's going to be one of our keys. And this is why you remember these events more clearly than others, okay? So if we think back to our Impala, next time they go up to the watering hole, they might have that picture in their mind, that bam moment. So when that happens and that switch takes over, if you remember that, the red X that crossed off the prefrontal cortex area, this is what happens. What's poorly remembered for our victims and witnesses when this has happened is a sequence of events. Events and details outside the perceived threats. Okay? And that's pretty important. So that Polaroid picture, you're looking at the threat, right? So that your kid jumping out of the closet, you might have this picture. You might have this picture from somebody who's witnessed a drive-by of a white passenger car with somebody with their arm sticking out shooting. So, but that's all they see is that perceived threat. But what's well remembered with our victims and our witnesses are the details most important to survival. So it might be where that gun was pointed, if it wasn't pointed at them, or if it was pointed at them, the details most important to survival is, holy hell, there are guns in my face. And that is important to their survival because they need to get away from it. So threat of harm, often we call it the weapon focus in cop work, right? So in cop work, we are looking for that threat so that we stay safe. And when that comes out, you're focused on it. Now let's go to the 7-Eleven clerk. Maybe the 7-Eleven clerk is working graveyard shift and somebody comes in and robs them at gunpoint. And certainly it frustrates our dispatchers and it frustrates us as we're responding to the scene. So our clerk, they call 911 and they're on with the dispatcher. And that dispatcher is saying, okay, what do they look like? I don't know. What color hair do they have? I don't know. Is it long or short? I don't know. Well, certainly when we're responding to a scene, we're thinking, well, we need and want all that information. But then they get to a point, were they armed? Yeah, there was a big old gun in my face. And it was silver, it had pearl handles, and there were scratches on it. Well, how are they getting all that detail from the gun, but you can't tell me who was behind that gun? It's because you're focusing at the threat for survival. The threat was that gun. And again, what does that gun feel like, or that bam moment, that photo, if you will? It's infused with emotions and sensations. So here's some of those important things that we talked about with the fire hose. The threat of harm is extremely important. The emotions, how they felt about this situation for our victims, for our witnesses, and the sensations, right? Like smell, like touch, feel, that sort of stuff. So the emotions and the sensations, extremely important. And we're going to need this for our interview, okay? We're going to get to that here in just pretty quick. So dissociation. This is kind of a crazy thing. It's our purpose. The brain's purpose is to protect us from overwhelming sensations. Let's go back to the saber-toothed tiger, right? And that saber-toothed tiger has jumped out and it's got us by the foot and it starts eating our foot. Well, we don't want to feel, this is something that our brain has some mercy on us, and it might dissociate us away from that pain of our foot being chewed off. If you talk to some officers that have been shot in the line of duty, some might say it didn't hurt at all, or it didn't hurt at the moment, but then it really hurt afterwards. You're going to hear things like that. Has three features. So this blank, spaced out, disconnected from our body, and autopilot kicks in. Our victims might report things like this. I felt like I was in a corner watching. It was like I went to another place. I was just spaced out. So our witnesses might just be spacey. This started happening and I just wanted to go away. That sort of thing. Maybe it's a witness that's been shot and they've disassociated from that, and it's not a murder, but they're still a victim witness. But we want to remember, it's like I was in a dream watching a movie. This autopilot, super duper important. So I've made it bigger and even pointed an arrow at it. Autopilot is pretty cool. We train for that as officers. We train muscle memory. We do drills. We do all this stuff because we want, when that bam moment hits, that our bodies and our brain takes over in that moment and makes the right decisions. That's why we train that way. But our victims a lot of times do not, or our witnesses, and they just go on this autopilot thing. And especially in sexual assault, this is very counterintuitive. So our victims might have finished the sexual assault, and it may assume or appear like they participated in. They may have said no, but they did this, this, and this. But that is part of the trauma. That's the autopilot. Super important. So our brain doesn't have the infinite capacity to observe, so it narrows the focus and ignores the rest. So you can see the forest of the tree, but you can't see this both at the same time. Let's go back to the 7-Eleven clerk. She can tell you about the gun. She can tell you about what this person looked like, so on and so forth. Okay? So when you're talking to a witness, I saw the gun come out of a car, he fired a shot, my friend went down. How many other people were in the car? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? You were just standing 10 feet away from the car when this gun came out and shot your buddy. Because that was the 4 or 3 other people that may have been in the car was not a threat to their survival at this point. So their brain narrowed it down. And you may be going to your witness going, well, you're just making stuff up. I know that there's a few other people in that car. Makes sense. That's where a lot of our communication has lapsed. Our perpetrators, they make sense to us. So if we're talking to somebody who's not traumatized or was a perpetrator, they can tell us things in order. Once upon a time, happily ever after. Well, that's how we were raised on golden books. right? And fairy tales. We start and happily ever after. This is how we write our police reports, or people who are not in law enforcement write their reports or things like that. Is I would respond to the scene, I did this, this, and this, and I booked the idiot in jail. Or it might be when somebody comes home from work and you're telling your spouse about your day. You usually start at the beginning of the day and you go to the end of the day. Well, what would happen if you started switching that up with your spouse? You know, maybe you told them about something you did at 2 o'clock, and then maybe you did a little bit at 9 o'clock, and then you went back to 5 o'clock, and you left out that middle portion. Well, maybe your spouse is doing this, this, and this, right? And they jump on you. So our victims can have islands of memory. So they can be all different sizes. With that memory, when that bam moment happens, so you'll have memory to that, and then you will have islands of memory after that in a lot of cases. So you can have Oahu, which is a big island, but then you have Molokai and Lanai off to the sides, and Maui gets bigger and Hawaii gets bigger. So you have these gaps in between, right? So maybe the sticky note analogy, you know, that looks like my office that I'm in right now. And maybe your traumatic event are the pink sticky notes. So we need to know how to get in there, get those pink sticky notes. Then it's our jobs as investigators or people in the justice system to put those pieces together. So the good news is, even though the memories are fewer, they're highly accurate. So the bad news is the memory is slow and difficult. It's finding and consolidating of those memories that's difficult for the defense circuitry, for that area of the brain after that bam moment. So they're highly accurate, because next time that Impala goes down to the watering hole and this little air bubble pops up, well, that's what happened last time before all those big old teeth came out. So now your brain, more likely than not, is going to react the same way as you survived and get out of there. So there are fewer that wants to recognize those threats. So in the future, if you survived, you have a very good opportunity about going down the same neural pathway. So as police officers, especially in the justice system, that's who gets studied. We're kind of professional victims of trauma. It happens to us all the time. So critical incident amnesia. Force Science does a lot of research on officer-involved shootings. And a lot of our protocols and shooting protocols are designed around this neurobiology stuff. So this temporary amnesia will affect the officer's memory and their ability to write a detailed report. Okay, well, that makes some sense. After the first sleep cycle, the officer's memory increases by about 50%. So that's after the first sleep cycle. So some of those islands are filling in. After the second sleep cycle, the officer's memory increases up to 90%. So they're getting some of it back. Some of it's lost forever. So in Salt Lake County, if I were to shoot somebody, the crew comes out, make sure I'm okay. They do a quick public safety statement. Is that the suspect that's down? So because if there's two suspects, my buddies, for public safety reasons, need to go find that other person. And then they might ask me some of the directions of where my shots may have gone, so they can go take a look and try to find those other bullets. But for a formal interview, I would come back about 3 or 4 days later for a formal interview and still not write a report. It's just an audio recording. Because you think about this, if we're having people filling out witness statements, right? How much are they putting on those witness statements? Usually about 3 or 4 sentences, and that's about it. And some of those I had to tell them to put them in, right? Well, you said this to me. You know, you had to coach them through a little bit. Because their brain can't get to those memories. Also, our fine motor skills. To write, those are fine motor skills. During trauma, those go away. I carried a Glock. because all the motions and stuff were big muscle groups, and all I had to do is aim and shoot. And the most detailed thing I had to do, really, if I had to, was to drop the magazine with my thumb. So we learn our fine motor skills go with trauma. So our body's response, let's get into that for a second. So that bam moment happens. Let's call these neural pathways. So bam, you automatically freeze. Looks like a pause, but you freeze. Everybody, that's something you can't control. Hopefully it's like that for us. And you look at these neural pathways. Maybe I did training on this, maybe I did this, maybe in the past I did this, like with the watering hole and that bubble coming up. That's how I took care of the situation, and I survived. I may be a little messed up afterwards because our brain has a harder time with that part, but I survived. So it will choose which one of those ways to go. However, if it doesn't feel like there's an option that's good enough, it will freeze and stay there. So some people may end up freezing. Some people, a lot of things happen during that time. So we've heard of deer in the headlights, possums, that sort of thing. That is going into that freeze moment and not being able to get out of it. Okay. So threats detected. This happens with our witnesses as well. Threats detected. Options are weighed. Am I going to run from this? Am I going to stay? Super encoding begins. So next time, so if we think of the watering hole, and if there's no other options, we'll stay there. Yikes. And so the immobility, if you will, the purpose is to preserve life. Perception is reality. You have a perceived inability to escape. It usually follows a failed struggle or a fight or an escape, right? Usually pretty fast onset, pronounced verbal and physical. It can last for hours or minutes. Crazy. Happens to people, and they can freeze for hours. Extreme fear is what is brought on by, right? So important parts, and probably the most important part when we're talking to victims and witnesses and things like that is this. Their perception is their reality. So if they perceive this and they're telling you this is how they felt, their perception's their reality. We may feel something different, but their perception is their reality. So pronounced verbal and physical immobility. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. My legs, I couldn't fight back, that sort of thing. We'll show a couple little quick examples, but not video-wise when we get to that point. So our responses from our victims, they might say, I was frozen. When I saw this happen, I was just frozen. I felt numb. Everything was in slow motion once everything started happening, the shooting or things like that. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. Right? We're going to hear all these weird things. That's counterintuitive to us. If somebody had a gun and started shooting, I'm running. Not necessarily. Your body or your brain has that switch that you can't control. Tonic immobility happens in a lot of things. The most significant that they found, well, back in 2008 anyway, 60% was with sexual assault, but it happens in every type of trauma. Trauma is trauma. So faint. Faint is similar to the tonic immobility stuff. It's a sudden onset, but it takes a little bit longer for somebody to come out of it. So they might be groggy coming out of it. So your heart gets this big input of stuff. And but what they're describing to us, our witnesses, would be feeling woozy or faintness or sleepiness, loss of consciousness, muscle tone. This happened to me once in a foot pursuit. I'm rounding the side of an apartment as I'm running after this guy, and all of a sudden, no muscle tone in my legs. They just go. And I go and try to do the best tactical roll I can, get back up. My legs are still rubber. Boom. I hit the ground again. I'm not chasing that guy anymore. But this happens to us. Think about when your buddies or maybe you got into a vehicle pursuit and you get on the radio and they're all, they're not getting it out. And of course you tease your buddies, but that's part of this. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. Sleepiness. That's pretty big, especially when it comes to sexual assault stuff, because our victims may have slept over after being raped. Things like that. So it can be very counterintuitive. And it can also go back and forth. So when we're interviewing somebody and they've witnessed this, they can say, you know, I don't remember this whole block of time, but then I remember this, and then I remember that, and then I don't remember anything after that. So that could be the saber-toothed tiger chewing off your foot, and you go into collapsed immobility to protect yourself from the pain and the overwhelming sensations. And you wake up and holy crap, they're still eating my foot, and you might go back out again. All right? So flight. Flight happens as you're trying to, first freeze, bam, I'm gonna flee, I know I can run, and I'm gonna run. So that's another reaction. Bam, freeze, flight. And then you also have fight. Fight is also while you're fleeing. So you may throw a few punches, but you're backpedaling. If you watch horrible officer-involved shootings, you'll see an officer go up to a car, engagement happens, and they are backpedaling to cover concealment as they're fighting, right? Maybe you're on scene and you get clocked and you're fighting away from whoever you just clocked you, and then your brain gears catch in and go, oh, I can take that person, and then you'll advance forward. So in sexual assault crimes, I investigated about 1,200 of them. I had 10 that resisted and only 2 that fought like hell. Most people freeze when it comes to some of this trauma. And again, with officer-involved shootings, here's a bunch of stuff. Fast motion time, diminished sound, intensified sound, tunnel vision. And again, one of the biggest ones is autopilot. And we want autopilot to kick in, right? So here's the thing. People will ask me, aren't you supposed to be objective and independent and not victim-centered or witness-centered in these type of investigations? You're going to be totally objective. Well, yes, I am. But we also, let's look at this. We have children's advocacy centers all around the country. I think these are from Alabama. But just like in child abuse cases, we want to interview the people who have been traumatized to their ability. If they've been traumatized and we're doing the who, what, when, where, why, and we're not looking out for them, we're not interviewing them to their ability. With child cases, do we assume that they are all telling the truth? Well, we want to go in there and get the information that we want, but we interview them in a soft room and this kind of circumstance, and sometimes in these type of protocols, because we are interviewing them to their ability. And we have not been doing that so much with victims and witnesses of these crimes. So on the interview process, I still have about 15 or 20 minutes, so we're going time-wise fairly well. So 4-letter words in bright colors. This is kind of what's been happening. We have the suspect and the victim. They communicate similarly, right? Prefrontal cortex, rational thinking. We can reason, we can have all sorts of thought processes, communicate. Then that bam moment happens, that switch happens that we have no control over. Our suspect or non-traumatized person is still communicating the same that they were with the prefrontal cortex. But those memories and stuff afterwards, our brain communicates in a different language. It communicates differently. So we go out and we do interviews with our suspects and people that weren't necessarily there and not traumatized by this event. And we're communicating similarly. We're talking with our prefrontal cortexes, things like that. Then when the police go talk to the victims and witnesses, our brain still communicating with the prefrontal cortex. Their brain is communicating differently. And our lack of communication has been there, and that's where we've been dropping a ton of evidence. So what we need to do is we've been talking cortex to cortex like this. And that's wrong, right? What we want to do is to communicate with the defense circuitry and communicate through the side door, if you will, of the brain, so we can get to those memories, so we can get better evidence for our cases. So that area, if you will, okay? So it's not as hard as we've built this up to be. It's actually very easy. So we want to interview the defense circuitry, smoke detector, if you will. So it understands emotions and sensations. So what's been encoded in those photo memories, if you will. But it can and shuts you down if any smoke is added to that smoke detector. Maybe that's frustrating your victim. Maybe that's scaring your victim with where you're interviewing them with, all that sort of thing. But it can turn off, right? So the key is, don't piss it off. Don't piss off that area of the brain. Don't scare it, okay? So some of the things that are counterintuitive to us when we're talking to victims of crime and witnesses is these normalizing type of behaviors. It's really kind of weird. Human beings have this strong need to get back to normal after this bad moment happens. So, it could be anything. In sexual assault cases, maybe they go and take a shower afterwards. Maybe victims go and witnesses go talk to other people and appear normal to friends and family. Maybe this incident happened on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and they go to Thanksgiving dinner like nothing ever happened. And on Saturday, they're falling apart and calling and reporting. A lot of people just want us to go away. So it's normalizing behaviors, cleaning up the crime scene before the police get there, that sort of thing. Want to get back to normal. So one of the things is this. We want to have this strategy to go in and talk to the smoke detector, if you will. And that startles fairly easy. So empathetic eyes. All right, here we go. You can still have empathetic eyes, which maybe they're soft eyes, kind of relaxing these muscles around the outside of your eyes. And this is one of the key things to get to that area of the brain is being empathetic. You want to show genuine empathy. If you can't get to genuine empathy, you want to soften those eyes. And over time, you may not get as good information, but you're going to get better than what you had. And then over time, you may soften up and have a little bit more empathy, okay? So you want to have empathy. You can still be tactically turned on in your head about what's going around in your situational awareness. But you need to have the empathetic eyes and that sort of approach to your victims and your witnesses so they don't feel as threatened. Empower and give choice. This is an important part as well. For our victims, for our witnesses, they lost an area of power that they could not control. Even if it's small little things. Hey, do you want to drink water? Do you want to sit there? Or do you want to sit there? Those are little easy questions, but that's giving them power back to make choices, because their choices were taken away at that bad moment in time, if you will. Open posture, we get this. You're not folding your arms, talking to people. Interested, certainly. Active listening, maybe it's a uh-huh or a nod while they're talking. Active listening, those soft eyes. There's a book called Blink, Malcolm Gladwell. When we just walk into a room and see a room full of people, our little area of the brain is going threat, no threat, threat, no threat, just by body language and stuff that they are sending back to us. You want someplace soft and comfortable. Do you want to sit there? Or do you want to sit there, right? And private and safe, as best as you can. Certainly for a more formal interview. But when you're on scene, you're doing the same sort of thing. So, soft eyes. If you look over here, you usually have people guess who that is. You want to have soft eyes like Keanu. Yeah, so I'm not seeing faces right now, but sometimes that joke works. You're probably not laughing though. Maybe. Okay, so let's go out on scene. What are we doing here? We have witnesses to a traumatic event. So if we're going to interview these people, which we need to, what are we going to do? There's a lot of factors here. What's going to be threats to them? Does this person over here know that this person knows who does it or did it and is afraid of that person, right? So we want to instill what was taken away, and that was their safety. Their brain went off. Privacy, so that other people don't know that you're talking to them. Someplace comfortable, and a place where you're not as much of a threat, especially on scene. So maybe we would take the lady in the pink tank top over somewhere away from everybody. Maybe it's sitting them in your car to talk to them. Someplace private, safe, and comfortable. And then you'd want to try to do a follow-up interview afterwards, a day or two later. You're going to get some information now, but you may get additional information with the follow-up interview that's a little bit more formal, less threatening, and a few sleep cycles to help condense those memories. So our first responders, they have this is the hardest job. So a lot of times with witnesses and victims, with victims of sexual assault, I have them look for a probable cause. And if there's any peripheral details, like from the forest that happen to bleed in, I have them record those fast because those can dissipate. And they might be important to our investigation later. Ask about central details. So the central details being that bam moment, and I concentrate on the visceral feelings, okay? That's super important. And then more detail, hopefully if you do a follow-up interview, may come out. And that's normal. So in domestic violence, however, we know that once we're on scene, and there's a good possibility that they will not participate in the investigation going forward. So we will have to do much more than just the probable cause type of interview. So there's a lot of hurdles, certainly for patrol. And sometimes we stumble, but it happens. First off, this first hurdle would be more the use of force continuum, which is kind of fading, by the way, but still Officers' mere presence in our uniforms are designed to be intimidating. They're designed to hold that power, that respect. That's also a hurdle when we're trying to get to a victim or a witness to their memories. So we want to think about that. And then also, depending on people's biases or the area or how they've been raised, to think about talking with us. Those could be some of those hurdles, right, that we have to get around to get the information out of their brains. So like this young lady here, certainly traumatized. How are we going to talk to this person in the moment? That's hard. Certainly, we put up our personal shields as to not go home with all those emotions. That's a whole other category. We can talk about it another time. However, in talking with her, what are you going to do? Well, first off, even though it's a thin piece of tape, I'm not talking to them like this. The tape is certainly a barrier. The uniform's a barrier. Standing is a barrier. The emotions are a barrier. You know, there's a set of chairs behind her. Maybe we go over and sit down. I may, since that's crazy for us as patrol officers to sit down on calls because of the safety issues with doing that. But if you have like our guy at the door, hey dude, I'm going to sit down for a second. They have your back. That's what their job is. Now we get down to eye level, so we're not looking down and setting off that smoke detector, right? And then we're going to ask some questions around the visceral, right? And it's going to get more emotions like this. But we need to get those for this case, okay? So on scene, maybe I'm in an area, I'll pull up a hard chair from the kitchen. Again, something that's hard, that's easy to get out of in case you need to react. So only do it, of course, if you have a backup unit there. You want to be eye level. Try not to be threatening. Softening those eyes, right? I use my first name. Hey, I'm Officer Justin, or I'm just Justin. You can call me Justin. So that also helps tactically get to that area of the brain we're calming down and not trying to make mad. Hard chair, active listening. This is hard. Active listening part is the hard part because you don't want to interrupt. And then patience. So you're looking for that bam moment, that situation where it goes from normal, expected to the unexpected. That shooting goes off. They're victimized. That bam moment happens. We're looking for that moment in time. So it could be maybe you're just getting narrative and it's all in order, then it goes crazy. So after that bam moment, you're looking for the freezing. So maybe everything is in order, and then they start talking about these feelings that are happening. Some of the stuff from the trauma, dissociation. They're having a hard time getting those memories back, absent those memories. And then those focuses on threats and survival. Okay. So how does this come out? Right? How does this come out in our work? Well, when we're out there, maybe it's this. This isn't a sexual assault. This is an attack that happened in a Starbucks. So here, Shelby's talking about the first thought as she lays bruised and bleeding on the floor of the Starbucks. So she was right here. I didn't want to die. So her perception is her reality, right? She did not want to die. So we're going to think to ourselves, okay, that can set off the brain stuff, right? She backed up, so she started to flee. She tried to put distance between herself. That's all part of that trauma. And other people are witnessing that, right? So if they're witnessing this, we know that their brain's going off and they're feeling threatened. He just came in the door and hit me in the head from behind, right? Witnesses here. So Hamilton's coworkers, however, remained frozen, unsure what to do, she said. I started to think why no one was helping me, right? Well, the witnesses froze. That moment in time happened. So other people might be describing this, whether it's the victim, whether it's the witnesses, that sort of thing. Then they ran out the door screaming for help. So they fled, right? Over here, this is a 911 call about being tied up by an intruder. So she heard a neighbor, so she ran over there. So our witness went, that's not a right sound. They ran. That's part of the trauma. That's part of the threat. Found her bound up. She's scared. She didn't want to go outside her house, right? After the intruder left. The woman was trying to talk to the dispatcher about this person, but the homeowner who was tied up barely answered. They could only do these one-word answers to the questions because of the trauma. Yes, no, yes, no. So they had to go back and talk to the neighbor that wasn't as traumatized. Those fine motor skills, tonic immobility was still in there with the boys. Okay? So here's another one. This is in Kentucky. This is a school shooting, right? So similar to gang shootings, that sort of thing. This person, she blacked out. I couldn't move. I got up and tried to run, but I fell. So this witness to the school shooting, she fell. She started hearing, right? I heard, which is one of those sensations. It was highly accurate. I heard someone hit the ground. It was so close to me, okay? Everything went black for a good minute. I just froze. I didn't know what to do, and then I got back up and ran. Bullets were flying everywhere if we keep going down. So they're going to be describing this to us. What doesn't work for interviewing people that have been through this and are showing this, talked a little bit about the stuff that does. But what doesn't is the who, what, when, where, why. Well, that's what we need for our investigations is the who, what, when, where, why. That's why you have to use side door to the brain. If we start using confrontation, coming off edgy, it's going to scare that brain and shut off the information you're going to get. Rapid fire questions do the same thing. And when we are, our adrenaline's gone off, we're trying to solve things, we're on scene, we're hitting those rapid fire questions. But you need time to get back to that area of the brain. And if you're doing rapid fire questions, although the situation may need it sometimes, you're not getting accurate information and you're shutting down the brain. Polygraph and voice stress test will void your federal grants. You're doing that with victims. So if we're asking them to do a detailed statement, I wouldn't. They're just going to give you 3 sentences. And also those can be used against us in court. My training partner, one of my training partners is a prosecutor and has had this done. During closing arguments, the defense attorney will say, hey, that officer did a great job. Right after this happened, he gave them a witness statement and said, write down everything that you can remember. Right when it was fresh in their minds, and they wrote 3 to 4 sentences, and now they're testifying for 2 hours. They're just embellishing. They're just making things up now. See where that comes into play? So we've made new witness statements that give 2 or 3 lines to a couple questions that would be around probable cause. And then we have on there that says, say some brief stuff, because we use those things to manage scenes sometimes. Hey, you go sit over here and fill this out. You fill this out, sit over there. And then it also has personal information that we need for our reports as well. So we want to slow down the interview process. So here, is that a great time to give somebody a witness statement? No, it's not. To get the information that we need, it's not a good time. If it's a public threat, maybe we need to get a few little details. But you're not going to get anything. So during these interviews, they can have a flat affect, the strong emotions. They'll go back and forth, emotional mood swings, right? So these may be present for the event, but these can also come back when you're getting to that area of the brain. So even though they might be argumentative with you or irritable to you, it's not about you. It's about the situation. It's about everything else. They don't know you. Right? So certainly we want to be more like child forensic interviews. We have identical goals. We want our victims talking in narrative form, and they're choosing the details to get out of their head, okay? It makes them feel comfortable. They're going to give you a huge narrative. And a lot of times it's about stuff that we don't care about for our investigation, but them providing us that information and talking helps them get to those areas of the brain where the good stuff is that we need for our investigation. So it's patience, right? These aren't hard. And it helps keep our victims and witnesses involved in the case and participating, right? So the victim should be controlling the narrative. They should be doing most of the talking. The hard thing is keeping our mouths shut, right? And staying out of the way. We want to go, oh, I want to know more about that fact. And we'll interrupt them so that we can do that. That's something you write on a piece of note paper, and you're going to come back afterwards if they don't explain it in the further narrative. Once you do that, you're shutting down the flow and not be good. So this interview is a guideline. It's fluid in nature. It has 3 bits to it, if you will. A beginning, a middle part, and an end. Every victim, case, and witness is different. So this is fluid in nature. Interviewing people is an art form. This is giving you guys a little bit more wisdom or something to try to see what works for you. I do have support people that will be in formal interviews. Their job's just to console and help out with the victim, or let me know, hey, Justin, it's time to take a break. They're not there to answer questions or give input. They're there to be quiet and watch out for the victim. Or say, hey, Justin, it's time for a potty break. Okay, cool, I didn't notice. They need to remain silent, because once they start asking questions, they can end up as a witness being subpoenaed. Before I start talking to people, even in their homes, I might do some mindfulness calming techniques. I know that sounds crazy, but there's some easy ones that work, and the scientific reasons for why they work, we can address that later, or you can do some research on your own. But it does. So, oops, déjà vu. It promotes a detailed statement from our victims. And usually what I do is say, hey, I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. I did that earlier as well, right after my technology failed on me. Come back and bring my brain back into focus on what we're doing. So it's just the act of consciously doing those deep breaths and the long outtake that helps bring down in calm so we can get back to that area of the brain. But it also trains the brain to concentrate on now moment and task. Now we're going to start asking for it to give us some other, we're going to give it some other tasks to do. Sorry you're going through this. We're here to help and keep you safe. So, set the tones. So I explained the purpose. Hey, the purpose I'm talking to you right now, I know this just happened right after this event, the shooting, but the purpose to talk to you right now is to gather as much as possible about what you experienced today. Right? We're kind of trying to stay away from the story stuff. Stories sound like lying, things like that, but about your experience. So I might set somebody down. Maybe it's in the squad car. Maybe it's in those 2 chairs outside that house. And I'm eye level, soft eyes. Hey, I'm here to gather as much information about the experience that you just had. I record interviews. It depends on where you're at in the country, so on and so forth. Maybe you're already on body cam. So thank you for being here. If this is more of a formal interview, I'm here to gather as much information about your experience. If you don't know the answer, don't guess. Just tell me that you don't know. I can certainly understand when things happen like this, there's going to be things that you're not going to be able to answer. But don't guess. It'd be best if we didn't know, and I can explain that. Sometimes victims or witnesses are embarrassed or feel like they did something wrong in this event. It's important to tell me everything, and please don't leave anything out. I tend to their immediate priority, especially if this is formal. You know, do you need to hit the restroom? Do you need a drink? Again, I'm asking them small questions that they get to answer, and that also gives them more power because it's been taken away, which gives us better access to that area of the brain. It's pretty tactical. I know that we're getting close on time, and I have 3 more slides after this one. This may take 10 minutes. Is that all right? Especially if you're on scene. But if this is a formal interview and you used to do these in 30 minutes, these can easily take an hour, hour and a half. They take more time. You have to have patience in these interviews. It sucks. Do you have any questions before we start? Sometimes this is a place where my training partner had somebody say, hey, when do we pay you? Well, I'm a prosecutor, you don't pay me, and things like that. And if they're worried about something like that, they may not get to that area of their brain. Maybe their kid gets out in 30 minutes from school that they have to pick up. So this we may want to reschedule because these do take longer. So, help me understand everything that you're able to remember about what happened. Help. They want to help us out. The witnesses, the victims, usually want to help us solve that guy. So help me. Able. A lot of times they're not able to. It's a very non-victim blaming word. Right? Remember about what happened. All sorts of different versions of this kind of question. And then the hard part is being quiet. That's when I usually will duck my head down a little bit and not make eye contact and let them get started. Sometimes they'll say, well, where do you want me to start? Well, maybe when you arrived at Uncle so-and-so's house. Tell me everything you're able to about from there. Let them go. And not interrupt. So that's where you're doing this, this active listening. And when they're done with that portion, I'm going to be quiet again. And I'm probably going to take 2 focused, deep breaths. Because after that, if they're going to continue to talk to you, that's where some really good stuff happens. So certainly open-ended questions. We want to stay away from the yes-no answers or questions. Open-ended, headline question style, focus on threats and emotions. Silence, again, is an interviewing tool. If hard questions are necessary, I explain why. So let's go back up to headline questions. Since it's hard to get to those memories in their brains, a headline question gives you time or gives them time to get back to that area without frustrating them, they're thinking that you're waiting for this answer that they can't get to. So that might look like, hey, I want to talk to you about that white car that was driving by. So I'm going to ask you some questions around that white car. So while we're doing this, they are going back into their brain looking for that white car. And they're not feeling bad about doing that. Always going to ask some questions about that. When that white car got to the front of the house, and that arm came out with the gun that you told me about, Can you tell me about how that felt? So I was scared to death. I thought I was going to die. That my body went limp, blah, 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 blah. Okay. But then, you know, sometimes they will also get more detail. Oh, I could also see where there was other people in the car. So you might be gleaning a whole lot more information. For me, that was locating additional evidence on a crime scene. Sometimes it was so I could write a search warrant because that memory is highly accurate. So if I have them describe that car and I assume that car's in a closed garage that I can't see in, and I need to write a search warrant for that, that person whose perception was their reality and that highly accurate memory because of the threat of the gun and the description of the car is highly accurate, I put that in my search warrant so I can get into that garage to corroborate. If hard questions are necessary, I explain why. Now, asking hard questions is not trauma-informed. So what am I going to do? I do need to ask hard questions sometimes. I'm going to explain why. You know, I know you guys were at this house and there's drugs happening there. The reason I'm asking, and I'm going to ask you about if you participated or not, because defense might bring this up and so on and so forth. Can you tell me everything that you're able to about that? And that's a whole lot softer and a more trauma-informed way to ask a non-trauma-informed question. And then I would do that at each BAM moment. So as I listen to that, or around each element and BAM moment, so as I'm listening to that narrative, I might be writing things down. And as soon as they end, I've had 17 pages of transcription and picked out 5 gold nuggets out of that. And then we come back and ask questions around those. Okay? So skillful support is going to save our victims tons of professional support. Express thanks for what they've done so far. I explain the next steps. I get them in touch with an advocate if they haven't been already, or how to make contact with me. Mainly advocates. So what we're looking for are these elements. This is the last slide. Are the elements that BAM moment, right? So maybe it's a forearm across their chest. Maybe it's a witness of the drive-by or the homicide. That BAM moment. So we want to go there with our victims and get how that feel and what that looked like. Then work outward to the peripheral things. So what were they wearing? Location that it happened. This is around alcohol-facilitated sexual assault. But motive, direction of travel, our suspect, their description, color of their shoes, that's probably not as important as that BAM moment, but it could be important, right? Because we still need that element over here, which is maybe the shooting, the stabbing, what have you. Witnesses, time of day, whether it happened at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, it still happened. So those are the peripheral sort of details. Now, if I'm interviewing a suspect, I'm going the opposite direction. I'm getting all the peripheral details first and working my way into the inside, because they will fill in the gaps where our victims are weaker. So that was it in a quick nutshell. This is my information. I can still hang on now if there's any questions. I know I went over and I apologize, but I'm happy to take email questions, all that at any point. So Jose or Laura, I think it goes back to you.
Thank you, Justin. And everyone will apologize for going over a few minutes. But if you have any questions, you have Justin's contact information there, as well as my information and your site's point of contact as well. Justin, thank you for this amazing presentation. And
I'm happy to stick around too.
Great. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to chat it in the Q&A. We can stick around for a couple more minutes. Other than that, thank you all for joining our webinar. We will be sending it out, the recording, to everyone as well in the next week. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the Q&A, and Justin and I will read them, and he'll answer them.
That was a weird sort of thing with my computer. It had me re-sign in to Google and stuff. I was still connected to the internet with you guys. I don't know. That was strange.
Yeah, that is weird. This seems, I don't think anyone's typing any questions. I'll just give it another minute.
No worries. Yeah, I kept on looking at how many more slides I had, and I went, uh-oh. So, again, I'm sorry I went over.
It's fine.
We did get
It's
started.
yeah, it is a lot of information. We did get started a few minutes late.
Yeah, yeah. And it is trying to cram a full day's worth of stuff in there. But hopefully people will glean a couple things to take back and try.
Right. Or they may also still reach out to you for further questions or details.
Absolutely. And I'm more than happy to do that, or phone calls or other Zoom meetings. I just like to talk.
Okay, I think we got one question.
Awesome.
Oh, a comment said, great job.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind. I was talking very fast to a screen. It is something that you just have to try and, and then find it in other sort of things. Because, those news stories that I put in, as we're starting to see trauma, we can start picking it out in all sorts of things and go, oh, but it helps us get in that pattern of recognizing.
Right.
Okay, well, that makes more sense. So.
Well, it seems like we have no more questions, so I think we'll end the recording, Jazz. Thank you all who are still on, or I'm not sure if they're still on, but thank you all. Feel free to email us if you have any questions. And then, Jazz, you can end the recording.